Have you ever wondered why a man's calm unravels when your voice disappears from his world? Silence, to the unprepared male psyche, is not an empty space, it is a mirror with no frame, a reflection he cannot control. When a woman withdraws her words, she withdraws more than sound, she removes the scaffolding upon which his ego leans. The sudden quiet becomes a chamber where his own unfiltered self echoes back at him, revealing shadows he has spent years disguising. Carl Jung understood this disturbance well. The feminine silence is not mere absence, it is a living archetype, the anima withdrawing her light. In that withdrawal, the man's unconscious begins to speak in a tongue he cannot easily translate. It whispers of wounds he has not healed, of patterns he repeats without knowing why. You might think he notices the loss of connection, but what truly gnaws at him is the loss of projection, the part of himself he cast upon you, now returned to him, unclaimed and unpolished. At first, he will attempt to fill the void with noise, messages sent not from love but from urgency, subtle provocations meant to stir a reaction, sudden displays of charm or criticism alternating like waves in a storm. He believes that if he can make you feel something, anything, he can re-enter the familiar dance. But silence does not negotiate. Silence holds its ground with a dignity that words cannot match. The Stoics knew this power. Seneca wrote that, silence is a lesson learned from the many sufferings of life. For the man, this lesson arrives not as philosophy but as discomfort. You see, the male ego often builds itself through external markers, affirmation, conquest, the presence of a woman who reflects his chosen image back to him. When that mirror is removed, he is left to confront the raw architecture of his own psyche. This is where Jung's concept of enantiodromia begins to unfold. The energy he once used to maintain control now turns inward, becoming anxiety, self-doubt, even obsession. The harder he tries to restore the familiar dynamic, the more he exposes the fractures within himself. Your silence becomes the stage upon which his inner drama plays out. Archetypes awaken in him, the abandoned child, the rejected lover, the wounded hero. These are not conscious choices, they rise unbidden from the depths, demanding attention. He may cloak them in rational explanations, but his behavior betrays him. The timing of his messages, the sudden nostalgia, the feigned indifference, each one is a fragment of his unconscious scrambling for the comfort your presence once gave. And yet, this is not about cruelty. It is about boundaries so deeply rooted they need no verbal defense. The woman who holds her silence is not punishing, she is protecting her own psychic space. In Jungian terms, she has withdrawn the anima projection, refusing to carry the emotional labor of his unfinished individuation. She becomes, in her stillness, a reminder that wholeness cannot be outsourced. For him, this is destabilizing. He may have mistaken your openness for endless availability, your warmth for an obligation to soothe him on demand. But silence strips away those illusions. Without the familiar cues, he is left to wonder, was her affection ever mine, or was it a gift I never truly valued? This question, if he allows it, can become the doorway to his growth. If he resists it, it becomes the seed of resentment. Silence has another power, it forces time to slow. In the absence of constant interaction, he begins to notice the shape of his own emotions. He may feel an itch to distract himself, to seek validation elsewhere, to replace the source of discomfort with something easier. But replacements rarely work because what he is missing is not simply you, it is the version of himself that existed in your presence. And this realization, though often unspoken, lingers. You, in turn, are not idle in your stillness. Silence is not a void for you, it is an active space where you realign with your own center. While he wrestles with the projections returned to him, you gather the threads of your own energy, weaving them into something untouchable. The more you stay rooted in this space, the more he feels the shift, not because you are withdrawing affection in a calculated game, but because you have stepped out of the role his psyche assigned you. The unspoken truth is that silence is not about making him miss you, it is about making you remember yourself. This is where your true power lies. Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires the withdrawal of projections, both giving and receiving. In your stillness, you refuse to be the container for his unclaimed work. And in doing so, you create the only conditions under which he can meet you as an equal, by meeting himself first. In the days that follow your withdrawal, the silence begins to take on a different texture for him. At first, it was sharp, almost metallic, a sting he could not ignore. Now, it becomes a persistent hum, a low vibration that seeps into his daily thoughts. It is there in the pause before he speaks to others, in the restless turning at night, in the way music or old photographs suddenly feel heavier than before. He cannot decide if the quiet is punishment or prophecy. The male psyche, when unaccustomed to self-examination, reacts to silence like a trapped animal, alternating between fight and flight. Sometimes he will attempt to provoke you, even subtly, to draw you back into dialogue. Other times he will retreat entirely, hoping that his absence will provoke yours to break. Both are tactics of the ego, not the self. The ego fears the unknown space that silence opens, because in that space, the shadow begins to stir. Jung described the shadow as everything within us that we deny, repress, or project. In the presence of a woman's attentive energy, a man can successfully hide pieces of this shadow, even from himself. Her laughter at his charm, her interest in his stories, her willingness to meet his emotional cues, all these become a shield against inner confrontation. But when her voice disappears, that shield falls. The shadow steps forward, uninvited, and asks the questions he avoids. Why do you need her reaction to feel secure? Why do you fear her indifference more than her anger? What will remain of you if she never speaks again? For many men, these questions are intolerable at first. Silence forces them to encounter the fragility beneath their practiced persona. They might seek to restore equilibrium quickly, but equilibrium born of avoidance is brittle. It cracks again with the smallest reminder of loss. The Stoics would see this as a gift, an opportunity to learn detachment from what cannot be controlled. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Yet the untrained mind resists, clinging to the illusion of control. And you are no longer participating in that illusion. Your silence is not the performance of mystery, it is the practice of sovereignty. You are teaching, without a word, that connection is not sustained by constant noise but by mutual respect for each other's inner lives. If he cannot sit in the quiet without seeking to dominate it, then his love is not love, it is possession. Over time, something subtle happens. His attempts to pull you back may slow. This is not always surrender, sometimes it is strategy, an ego choosing a new mask. But in other cases, it is the first sign of inner movement. When a man begins to sit with the discomfort of your silence without rushing to fix it, he begins, however reluctantly, the work of individuation. He starts to notice the difference between loneliness and aloneness, between needing your energy and respecting it. Yet this is a delicate stage. The temptation to re-enter his orbit with reassurance can be strong, especially if you sense his struggle. But breaking the silence too soon robs both of you of the transformation it can bring. Jung would caution here, without completing the cycle of projection and withdrawal, the psyche simply resets into the old pattern. The growth that was possible dissolves into familiar dynamics, and nothing changes. Meanwhile, he may begin to idealize you even more in your absence. This is the paradox: silence can amplify both clarity and illusion. Without direct contact, he fills in the blanks with memory, fantasy, and longing. The question is whether he will use this idealization as another form of projection, or whether he will see it for what it is, an image, not the reality. To pierce that illusion requires courage, the kind that faces the truth of who you actually are, not who he needs you to be. In this space, you embody what the mystics and philosophers called the unmovable center. You are neither chasing nor punishing, you are simply being. This beingness is magnetic because it is rare. Most people rush to fill silence with explanations, apologies, or emotional noise. But your restraint signals a mastery over yourself, and mastery is irresistible to those ready for it, and terrifying to those who are not. He may not yet understand that the silence is not about him, it is about you. But the longer it holds, the more he will feel its truth, that your worth is not determined by his acknowledgement, that your presence is a choice, not a given. And in this realization lies the quiet beginning of either his transformation, or his exit from your life entirely. As the silence stretches, it becomes less an interruption in his life and more a presence of its own, an unseen figure that walks beside him, sits across from him at dinner, lingers in the pause between his sentences. He notices how much of his identity relied on your responses. Without your voice to anchor the image he held of himself, that image begins to fade at the edges. In its place, fragments of the unfiltered self emerge, some noble, some petty, all unfamiliar in their rawness. The anima projection he once placed upon you no longer has a host. That psychic energy, denied its usual outlet, turns inward. At first, this feels like agitation. He finds himself overanalyzing old moments, replaying past conversations not for pleasure but to mine them for clues. The human mind, when confronted with ambiguity, seeks narrative, and in the absence of your input, he creates one. This narrative, however, is unstable. It shifts under the weight of his own insecurities, sometimes casting you as the unattainable ideal, other times as the cold betrayer. Both are distortions, both are shadows speaking in disguise. Jung understood this oscillation as the psyche's attempt to integrate opposing truths. The feminine silence invites him into this work, but it does not guide him through it. That is his task alone. To a man unpracticed in self-confrontation, the lack of guidance feels like abandonment. But the truth is simpler. You have stepped out of the role of emotional translator. You are no longer converting his actions into meaning for him. Without this translation, he must learn his own language. Here the Stoics align with Jung. Epictetus taught that no one can harm your soul unless you grant them entry. Your silence, then, is not harm. It is a withdrawal of entry into your inner world. It leaves him to examine why he ever believed your inner world belonged to him by default. If he resents this, it is because he confuses intimacy with entitlement. Slowly, the silence begins to peel away the layers of his performative self. He may realize how much of his behavior toward you was designed to elicit a predictable reaction. Perhaps he used tenderness to draw gratitude, or aloofness to spark pursuit. Without your engagement, these tactics hang in the air, exposed as strategies rather than truths. This recognition can be humiliating, but in that humiliation lies the seed of humility, the first soil in which genuine change can grow. Meanwhile, you have not frozen in time. Silence is your medium for transformation as well. You are not simply holding back words, you are recentering your energy, redirecting it toward the things that nourish rather than drain you. You become more attuned to your own rhythms, your own desires, your own thresholds. The longer you remain aligned in this space, the more your silence takes on an unmistakable quality. It is no longer defensive, but declarative. From a psychological perspective, this shift is profound. Defensive silence carries tension, as though waiting to break. Declarative silence stands like a pillar, unshaken, unbent, without urgency. The man senses this difference even if he cannot articulate it. Defensive silence invites testing. Declarative silence ends the game entirely. If he is capable of true self-reflection, this is the moment it begins. Not when you leave, not when you return, but when he understands that your stillness is not a tactic to control him, it is the natural expression of a woman who controls herself. This realization is destabilizing precisely because it dismantles the myth that his behavior dictates your worth. For others, this moment never comes. They will retreat into the comfort of distraction, finding someone new to project upon, someone whose silence has not yet confronted them. But even then, the imprint of your absence remains. They will sense, in the quieter corners of their mind, that they once stood before a woman who refused to be moved by fear, flattery, or demand, and that they could not match her steadiness. Your silence, then, is not the absence of power. It is the proof of it. It forces a man to stand alone in his own psyche, to face the inner architecture without borrowed scaffolding. Whether he rises to that challenge or crumbles beneath it is not your concern. Your concern is the integrity of your own being, and in that, you have already won. There comes a point when the silence stops feeling like an event and starts feeling like a climate, not a storm to wait out, but a new atmosphere in which he must learn to breathe. Days blend into weeks, and the space between you hardens into something he can no longer casually cross. The ease with which he once reached you has dissolved, replaced by an awareness that each attempt now carries weight. Even the smallest message risks revealing too much, that he has been thinking, that he has been missing, that he has been questioning. Jung wrote of the tension of opposites, the psychic force that builds when two conflicting energies are held without resolution. Your silence is one such force. It contains the paradox of absence and presence. You are not physically there, yet the imprint of you remains vivid. In that unresolved space, the male psyche begins to metabolize truths it once avoided. Some of these truths are uncomfortable, that his validation depended on you, that his self-image was inflated by your reflection, that the power he thought he held was, in part, borrowed. The shadow becomes less abstract now. It takes form in specific memories, the times he dismissed your feelings, the moments he assumed your patience was endless, the subtle ways he tested your loyalty without earning it. These recollections do not arrive in orderly sequence, they flare unexpectedly, often in moments when he is otherwise at ease. A scent, a phrase, a familiar street can jolt him back into awareness of what was lost. And each reminder is colored by the silence, which refuses to soften the edges or rewrite the story for his comfort. For the man willing to look inward, this is a crucible. He must distinguish between guilt that seeks pity and accountability that seeks change. The former longs to hear you say, "It's okay." The latter accepts that your silence may be permanent and asks instead, "What will I do differently from now on?" This distinction is the gateway to individuation. Without it, he will repeat the same dynamics with someone else, mistaking novelty for transformation. You, on the other hand, have crossed a threshold. The stillness you inhabit is no longer a holding pattern, it has become a place of creation. Your energy, once entangled in interpreting his moods and managing his needs, is now free to feed your own visions, your own work, your own growth. The inner architecture you maintain is not designed to impress him or anyone else, it is built to sustain you. This shift radiates outward. Others may notice it in your posture, in the calm cadence of your voice, in the way you no longer rush to fill conversational gaps. Your presence holds a density that no performance can mimic. It is the density of a person who has faced the pull of external validation and chosen instead to root inward. This is the kind of energy that cannot be faked, and it is precisely what makes it unforgettable. He may sense this transformation even from afar. If he reaches out, it will not be out of pure curiosity, it will be because the silence has reframed you in his mind. No longer the accommodating presence, you have become a fixed point, a reminder that some women do not orbit men's moods, they hold their own gravity. Whether he approaches with humility or with one last attempt at control depends on how far he has come in his own confrontation with the shadow. Here lies the silent truth you have known all along: your stillness is not a trap, it is a boundary. It is the clear, unwavering signal that your attention is earned, not owed, that your peace is non-negotiable, that your life is already full without the noise of those who do not value it. For a man unready to rise to that standard, the silence becomes a verdict. For the one who is ready, it becomes an invitation, not back into the same dynamic, but into a different kind of connection, one built on mutual respect and self-possession. In either case, you have not lost. You have only refined the terms under which you will be met. Eventually, the silence becomes a mirror so polished that he can no longer pretend not to see himself. There is no distortion now, no comforting haze to soften the outlines. What looks back at him is not the version he curated for you, but the one that exists when no one is there to affirm it. This is where the ego's defenses weaken, not because they have been forcibly broken, but because they no longer serve him. He begins to understand that what he feared most was never losing you, it was facing himself without you as the buffer. Jung taught that the withdrawal of projection is both painful and liberating. Painful, because it feels like losing a part of the self; liberating, because it reveals that part was never truly gone, only misplaced. Your silence is the catalyst for this process. By refusing to carry his unclaimed light and shadow for him, you force him to retrieve them. If he does, he steps closer to individuation. If he doesn't, he remains fractured, repeating old patterns until another woman's silence confronts him again. The Stoics might say you have acted in accordance with nature, not the sentimental nature of romance, but the deeper order in which each person is responsible for their own soul. Marcus Aurelius would remind him, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. In the context of love and loss, this means acting not to manipulate the other, but to bring oneself into alignment with truth. From where you stand, the transformation is already complete. Not because he has changed, he may or may not, but because you no longer hinge your peace on the outcome. You have moved beyond the need to be understood by someone who could not hear you when you spoke, beyond the impulse to prove your value to someone who only saw it when you withdrew. This is the rebirth the silence was always leading you toward. It is not loud or dramatic. It arrives quietly, like a dawn you didn't realize was breaking until the room was filled with light. You find yourself no longer rehearsing what you would say if he returned, no longer checking for signs that he has. The tether between his perception and your self-worth has dissolved. What remains is the unshakable knowledge that you are whole without any borrowed reflection. And this is the power most feared and most respected. A woman who knows her worth cannot be coerced by urgency, seduced by flattery, or subdued by withdrawal. She is not indifferent, she is discerning. She can love deeply without losing herself, and she can let go without bitterness. If he reaches for you now, it will not be to reclaim what was, but to approach what is. And what is will only accept him if he has met himself in the silence as fully as you have met yourself. If he does not reach, the story still ends in your favor, because your life is no longer built on waiting. The silence, once a chasm, has become a sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, you have found the truth that no projection, no persona, no pleading can alter. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.